The first thing I noticed was the blindfold. The second was the way my best friend's hands trembled as she tied it behind my head. And the third was the silence that followed when she leaned close enough for me to feel her breath against my cheek. I had known Emma for 11 years, but in that moment, standing inside her tiny kitchen with my eyes covered and my heart suddenly pounding, I realized there were things about her I had never dared to see. Emma and I had always been inseparable. We met during our first week of college, when she accidentally spilled coffee across my notebook and spent the next 3 hours helping me rewrite everything. From that day on, she became the person I called when life was beautiful and the person I called when it wasn't. We celebrated birthdays together, survived terrible breakups, shared cheap apartments, and built dreams that changed every few years. There was only one thing we never talked about, the strange feeling that sometimes appeared when our eyes met for a second too long. I had always pushed it away because I was terrified of losing the friendship that meant more to me than almost anything. That evening, Emma had invited me over for what she called a ridiculous, experimental dessert night. She had been working on recipes for a small bakery she dreamed of opening someday, and she wanted me to be the judge. After months of struggling to find investors and constantly doubting herself, she had finally decided to start small. I was proud of her, but I could also see how exhausted she was. She had spent years taking care of everyone else while quietly believing she wasn't good enough for her own dreams. If you enjoy stories about kindness, second chances, and the courage to follow your heart, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to Ripple of Kindness. Your support helps these stories reach people who may need a little hope today. Now, back in her kitchen, I couldn't see anything. I heard a spoon scrape against a bowl, followed by a nervous little laugh. She told me she had prepared several flavors and that I had to guess each one. I agreed, expecting chocolate, strawberry, maybe something with cinnamon. She placed a tiny piece of dessert against my lips. It tasted like vanilla, raspberry, and something warm I couldn't identify. I guessed raspberry cheesecake. She laughed softly and told me I was wrong. The second sample tasted like dark chocolate and coffee. The third was lemon with a hint of mint. I guessed all three incorrectly, and Emma laughed harder each time. Her laughter was familiar, comforting, and somehow more beautiful with my eyes closed. Then the room became quiet again. I heard her take a breath. Something changed in the air. She came closer. I felt her fingers gently touch my wrist as if she were making sure I was comfortable. Then she whispered that there was one final flavor. Before I could guess what she meant, she leaned forward and kissed me. It lasted only a moment. But somehow that moment rearranged my entire world. When she pulled away, neither of us moved. I could hear my own heartbeat beneath the silence. Then, in a voice so quiet it almost disappeared, she said, "Guess the flavor." I slowly removed the blindfold. Emma was standing directly in front of me, her cheeks flushed, her eyes filled with fear. She looked like someone who had finally opened a door she had spent years keeping locked. I didn't know what to say. I wanted to ask why she had done it, how long she had felt this way, and whether I had imagined every little moment between us over the years. But before I could speak, she looked down and admitted that she had been afraid. Not afraid of kissing me, she explained, but afraid that one honest moment could destroy 11 years of friendship. Then she told me the truth. She had fallen in love with me slowly. Not because of some dramatic moment, but because of hundreds of ordinary ones. Because I remembered how she took her coffee. Because I once drove 3 hours in the middle of the night when her car broke down. Because I stayed when she pushed everyone away. Because I believed in her bakery dream even when she stopped believing in herself. She said she had tried dating other people, hoping the feeling would disappear, but every time something good happened, I was the person she wanted to tell. My chest tightened because I suddenly remembered all the moments I had ignored. The way she always saved the last piece of cake for me. The way her face changed whenever I talked about another woman. The way she once told me she wanted a home where nobody had to pretend to be okay. I had always assumed she meant some future husband or family. Maybe she had been describing the future she secretly wanted with me. But I was still afraid. I told her that I loved her, but I didn't know if I was brave enough to risk losing her. Emma's eyes filled with tears, and she nodded. She said she understood. She wasn't asking me for an immediate answer. She just couldn't keep hiding anymore. That night, I went home carrying a small box of her experimental desserts, but my mind was somewhere else. I sat in my car outside my apartment for nearly an hour, remembering our entire friendship. I realized something painful. I had spent so much time protecting our friendship that I had never considered the possibility that my fear was preventing something even more beautiful from beginning. The next morning, I returned to Emma's bakery kitchen. She looked surprised when she saw me. I placed the dessert box on the counter and told her I had finally figured out the flavor. She smiled nervously. I told her it wasn't vanilla, raspberry, chocolate, or lemon. It was courage. She stared at me, tears gathering in her eyes. Then I admitted that I had been falling in love with her too. I just hadn't recognized it because she had been part of my life for so long that I couldn't remember where friendship ended and love began. Emma cried. I did too. There was no dramatic music, no perfect sunset, and no magical transformation. There were simply two frightened people standing in a small kitchen, holding hands and realizing they had spent years searching for something that had been beside them all along. We decided not to rush. We promised that if we were going to change our relationship, we would do it carefully. We would talk honestly. We would respect each other's fears. And if someday we discovered that love wasn't meant to work between us, we would still protect the friendship that had brought us this far. But it did work. Months later, Emma finally opened her bakery. It wasn't huge. It didn't have expensive decorations or a line around the block. It had 6 tables, white walls, handwritten menus, and a little wooden sign above the counter that said, "Made with courage." On opening morning, I stood beside her as the first customers walked through the door. She squeezed my hand beneath the counter, and I smiled. Her first signature dessert was called, Guess the Flavor. Every time someone ordered it, Emma would laugh and tell them it was impossible to guess. But I always knew. Because the flavor wasn't really about the ingredients. It was about taking the risk of saying what your heart had been trying to say for years. Sometimes the person you're afraid to lose is the very person you've been afraid to love. Sometimes friendship doesn't end when love begins. Sometimes, if both people are brave enough, it becomes the foundation for something deeper, stronger, and more beautiful than either of them imagined. If this story touched your heart, please like the video, share it with someone who believes in second chances, and leave a comment. Your engagement may help this story reach someone who is standing at the edge of an important decision, afraid to speak from the heart. And before you go, comment, "I choose courage," if you believe that sometimes the greatest love stories begin with a friendship. Because sometimes the heart doesn't need a stranger to show it what love feels.